Hey everyone, welcome back to FPL Fran. Today's video is going to be the Game Week 3 cheat sheet. If you've never seen the cheat sheet before, it's effectively a tier list in FPL, looking at the specific game week and looking ahead towards the future horizon of players, focusing on price points and positions and the sort of utility of a player coming up. We look at 3 game weeks within the actual cheat sheet image, but I actually do forecast 5 to 8 game weeks ahead and kind of look at how teams and players can perform over that run. We look at underlying stats of players to sort of consider their utility. We also consider my view of, let's say, expected minutes under what I think managers are setting up with currently. Equally, also the sort of historical numbers of the individual players, like defensive contributions, etc. We also tried to take note of some of the tactical shifts that have changed. For example, things like Nottingham Forest not getting a lot of defensive contributions within the first 2 games, and also trying to understand whether we're overrating or underrating that very small sample size. So anyways, this is going to be the cheat sheet for Game Week 3. This is a week where a lot of people have saved up 2 free transfers, or if you've, let's say, even used 1 free transfer, but potentially you're actually minded to use another one because we have so many issues across the board within the game. So many injuries to key players, so many issues, I think, outside of the key players where, unfortunately, a lot of players have not returned. Players that we expect to do well, and I think still continue to expect to do well. But as it stands, only a few select players have actually dropped mega hauls, and some players have just simply blanked along the way. I'd also like to shout out Fantasy Football Hub. There's an opportunity still to use the 50% offer up until the end of this month. You can actually use a lot of Pro Suite tools that will actually help improve your performance and actually win your mini leagues. And that actually is a term and condition that actually you can use whilst you use Fantasy Football Hub. So have a look at the link in the description below. See if you want to actually dominate your mini leagues and actually get things like, for example, suggested transfers and how they can improve your team in the short to medium term. So let's just jump into the cheat sheet now in the midfield position. I would say that my view of the midfield position has not changed one bit. I will say, however, that the premiums falling off outside of Salah has probably created a bit of a template structure shift where maybe now a 3-4-3 looks a little bit better than the 3-5-2. Otherwise, I still think the 4.5 to 5 million position is a desolate land and it's very dull. I really don't think we should be investing into these players. We had Josh King, who I mentioned last week, will lose minutes to Smith Rowe. Smith Rowe came back and scored. He's probably going to build fitness continuously, which will sort of put Josh King's minutes at risk. In the 5 million position, I think I've actually taken out Granit Xhaka because I still think, once again, that we have been, unfortunately, overrating Sunderland too much. Stack is someone who I expect to just get more consistent DEFCON, so if you actually want someone who does that, I think he's going to be a bit better than Granit Xhaka, who might still have some of the intangibles like penalties, etc., set pieces and goals from that, but I think you're going to get much more reliable returns from someone like Stack over the course of the season. Sar, I still think there's a bit of a dual-edged sword, but the opposite, where the more advanced he plays in this sort of box-to-box 10 type position, which you don't see often much in football, I think it kind of worsens the opportunity for him to get DEFCONs. And at the same time, I think it also doesn't mean that he's going to be your classic 10 where he gets crazy underlying stats and is just a really, really good player. With Dewsbury Hall, I think he's actually the least interesting Everton attacker. Is he underpriced? Absolutely, he's underpriced. But is he someone that you actually want to start every single week? I once again have to say, in my opinion, no. I know there's a lot of people we've started every single week who are more expensive than Dewsbury Hall, and they've done absolutely nothing as well, right? This is the case of our FPL teams. I am currently ranked 6.3 million. I own 2 goals in FPL, right? I understand what the counter argument is, but I still think that that's the case, where the reasonable sort of or reasonableness of the returns at the 5 million position just isn't enough for you to say that that player should be consistently starting within a team week to week, right? I think that's kind of a misuse of funds. In the 5.5 million position, I think that's once again where you still have some value. Yes, these 2 players blanked this week, but it doesn't suddenly mean that they're bad. I would say it's impressive that Reinders actually played 90 minutes, right? Because a lot of people were still very pessimistic as to Pep Roulette, etc., etc. So yes, of course, he didn't have a great game, but it's important to note that actually it's significant that whilst having a bad game, and City were chopping and changing players, that Reinders actually still played 90 minutes. I think that's very, very good and a healthy sign for him as a pick going forwards. Once again, this is a center mid, right? Someone who isn't exactly going to play in the 10 spot, but could still have very consistent returns at the 5.5 million price. And that's all I have to say. It's at that specific price point. It's almost like owning Gundo or Bernardo at a much cheaper price, or a mixture of, let's say, the 2 right now, because the minutes are much better, right? I think Reinders is most likely going to end up with more minutes than Gundo has ever played within Man City season, which is actually more similar to, let's say, Bernardo Silva's career profile under Pep. But he does seem to have a little bit more attacking threat than Bernardo anyways, given that he's actually recorded much better goal scoring and sort of overall creation seasons. So That's kind of my thought, right? A mixture of the two at a 5.5 price. You can't really go wrong with that. At Anderson, I think, yes, it's nice to see that Douglas Luiz join the club, and he's probably going to get some more minutes. I don't think that really has a significant impact on Anderson. Is Anderson exactly what we think he is in terms of, is he a potentially boring pick? Yes. Now, there's some other players at the 5.5 million price point who will score goals, right? Polina, Caicedo, for example. But I still think he's actually the most reliable player just because his underlying sort of defensive contribution data is that good. He's been very unfortunate to get 11 out of 12 for the last 2 weeks. And I think that just shows you that he's going to be there and thereabouts always. But that's unfortunately the swing with the DEFCONs, right? It's not too different from, let's say, a good team or a good defensive team that doesn't get clean sheets. Like, this is kind of what you're looking at with Anderson here and the +2 points every single week. With O'Reilly, he definitely gets to be added in the cheat sheet. This is simply due to the Rutter injury, which was a complete surprise. I have to say, I didn't see this coming. We saw Rutter actually pictured and videoed within training, so it seems like the news was very recent. But that just makes O'Reilly more nailed, and Welbeck missing the penalty just even makes him a better FPL pick, to be honest. Tavernier, we actually added into the cheat sheet last week, so I'm quite proud that he scored a goal. It was quite a big deflection. But he's a solid pick, right? I think the issue, as I mentioned, is that with the new recruits that Bournemouth have right now, he's not going to be a 90-minute player, but he could very well play 75, 78 minutes a game, which I think is still good enough at this sort of price point, given that you have access towards a very, very formidable attack within Bournemouth. Wilson gets a drop. I think it was a very specific one-time sort of setup versus Man United where Fulham were playing at home and they actually set up with two right backs where they play Castagna and Tete. And then Wilson actually came on as a sub and probably helped to change the game, as United also made some very interesting substitutions that sort of ceded control of the game on their part. I think that that's still an issue with Wilson's minutes, right? Because as long as Fulham dip into the market, then you're probably saying in a few weeks' time, Wilson's most likely going to lose minutes, not to Castagna, but to actually someone else within the team. And it's probably conditional on performance as well, right? There's going to be weeks where Iwobi plays better and maybe that you see a substitution, like let's say Adama, for example, because Iwobi can kind of flexibly play both flanks, as I've seen in the past. So it's more likely, of course, that Wilson could continue to lose minutes. So I think I'll probably overstep the mark a little bit with him as a pick. I could also be wrong, right? Maybe you just see Wilson as someone who actually is going to play in the matches that you want. Like, let's say, for example, Leeds at home in Game Week 4. But I just think at 5.5, you do really want someone to be starting every week. And if he doesn't do that even, within your own team, then that's the value lost. Caicedo, I feel a bit bad about making him orange. I probably think he could be a yellow pick. It's once again the case of how you want to spend that triple up of Chelsea. He did score a goal versus West Ham, but I think that's West Ham. I'm sorry. Anyone scoring a goal versus West Ham, I'm not really going to say that that's going to dramatically shift my confidence in terms of their attacking threat overall, and the same goes for Enzo Fernandez. So at the 6 million tier, we have Dango getting a massive rise. I introduced Dango to the cheat sheet last week because I expected him to be a good pick. Did I expect him to score a goal necessarily versus Villa? Not right off the bat, but healthy underlying stats from the first game on and really, really good minutes. 85 minutes. He has to shoot up to the top of my list, right? Because if he's ready to sort of play that sort of level of minutes, I think he's just going to be an excellent pick. This is a player who had always had some really good underlyings in the Premier League so far. He hasn't played that many minutes in the Premier League, but I have the confidence that he'll maintain these sort of underlying stats. And even if he does, you can see that he's in a world of his own in the 6 million tier. Even compare him to some of the other picks in the 5.5 million tier who have much worse minutes than him. He's that good, right? Dango is that good. And yeah, I'm that confident about him as a pick. And so he clearly gets a rise. The minutes are there and I'm there. Tielemans gets a soft drop. I just don't really know how to quite explain this Aston Villa team. I just think they're so poor. And yeah, there are better fixtures coming up, in the distance, but does that really make me so excited to own any Aston Villa player? Not really. I still think Watkins is the one to own. To be honest, like if you look at a game versus Brentford, he still got most of the chances, or at least a good volume of chances. I don't think he had a significant big chance, if you want to put it like that. But he's going to be the benefactor of that. And then actually having someone who's, sort of pseudo creative, like Tielemans, who's a bit, I guess, worse than Rodgers in terms of open play, I'm not too enthralled. There's still obviously the chance that he can get penalty share, and then Aston Villa is also in the market for a striker potentially, and that could kind of hurt Watkins indirectly and maybe give Tielemans penalties. But I think that's a bit of a reach, right? That's me trying to find a way to sort of think that Tielemans is still a great pick. I'm not sure if he is. Jorginho and Minte get a fall. I think Brighton just look a lot worse than I expected. Probably a poor call from me at the start, but one thing I have to say too is like the striker in the 10 position is much worse when Jorginho doesn't play. The reason why I had Jorginho green last week is because I was that confident that he would play either as a striker or as a 10. I just, for whatever reason, was super confident in the Reinders move. I don't have insider info, obviously. I moved into Jorginho Reinders like last Sunday or maybe Monday, and he was in training all week. So I don't know why I need to defend this view, but yeah, I don't really know what's going on with Rutter. I think Fabian Hertzler is a bit of a fraud. He never tells us anything, so that's that. And Minte gets a drop as well, just because of the... I think Gruda's someone who's going to get more minutes. He's probably going to rotate a bit because he's still struggling to find out what's going on. Fabian's a bit of a tinkerer. I think Minte could suffer in the short term as a bit of a result, and so that's why he gets a drop. In the 6.5, to plus tier, I think Kudush is just exceptional. As I said, I made a mistake in my Game Week 1 video, I think, sort of underrating Kudush's importance to the team. He is that important to the team. And someone that's not actually on the cheat sheet, for example, or at the same sort of tier is going to be Brennan Johnson, who I think is interesting, but nowhere near as exciting as Kudush. I think Johnson's clearly, and always has been, to be honest, a massive goal threat just when you look at his underlying stats. But I think Kudush is just much more important to the team. So even though he's going to get maybe potentially less points in the interim compared to Johnson, I think there's just more game states and more games where Kudush is going to play more minutes and give you that sort of consistency, either through set pieces or just finally when he gets his own open play goal returns. So that's kind of why I have Kudush at where he is. And I think Sarr is up there too. I've given a bit of soft drop because I just think, unfortunately, yeah, I'm gonna overreact potentially to Brighton early doors. They've had 2 penalties so far, and I think that actually kind of colors their numbers a bit too well. In open play, they've been a bit shocking and a bit dire, and they get a drop as a result. Grealish has been added. I still think he's not that interesting. You're mostly looking at a creative threat here, who I think is less interesting than Ajay because you're missing out on the penalties. You're also missing out on basically someone who's a little bit more tilted towards goal threat compared to, let's say, Grealish is with assist threat. And then Enzo, I'm not going to react to that West Ham goal, as I said. At the 7 million price point, I did mention Johnson previously with the Kudush sort of argument. I think him and Shadi are interesting, but they're probably a little bit too expensive still for my taste. Johnson is he could explode, right? He could have like a Salah-like season, and I could end up just looking like an idiot because he's potentially that good, right? He's sort of like a very XG dominant forward. A lot of people will watch him play and think, what does this guy do? But at the end of the day, he does score goals, and he does get onto the end of opportunities, right, that allow him to score goals. So that's kind of what Johnson does. Do I think he's going to get massive minutes? Not necessarily, but I think some of the injuries do help in the interim. And then on top of that too, his performances are going to keep him in the team, right? So I can understand why someone wants to move into him. I still think Kudush is the one, but I'm happy to sort of adjust my expectations with Johnson if he continues to just perform well. Shadi gets a bit of a soft drop. I think this is in part just thinking about how maybe I might have mispriced him. At 7 million, you're still asking for a lot here. This is someone who's not going to get defensive contributions necessarily. I'm not sure if he's going to reproduce the amazing sort of XG season that he had last year. And then also, if you have Dango, for example, and he becomes a little bit more of a larger threat to the team, like what does that happen in terms of tilting things? So I've given Shadi a bit of a drop here. I just think Dango's that much more exciting. So it's a reflection of that as well. At the 7.5 million price point, Gakpo makes me look sad every single week for the ones that I don't own him for, as it gets a bit of a soft drop, because I think moving to Arsenal is going to impact him. I do think he should have played left wing quite a fair bit, but I think there's going to be rotation. And unfortunately, when you lose the intangibles that he had at Crystal Palace, especially with set pieces, I think that's going to hurt him a lot. And yeah, I think that's kind of the issue, right? Where you have, let's say, Rice as a right footer, and that really helps. I'm not sure what's going to happen with the remainder of the set pieces, especially if Odegaard's fit and available. I think he's just going to get the sort of left footers. So yeah, that's kind of how I feel about the Saka impact. I think it indirectly does help Eze with his minutes, but I think it doesn't really help him with that sort of ceiling in terms of returns, given that we do expect good minutes. And Gibbs White gets a bit of a soft drop. I still think maybe at this sort of price point, you still want a little bit more open play value. I don't think he necessarily provides that for us. So he does get a drop. The 8 million tier, I think a lot of people were fair to say that I made probably a bit of an omission here in terms of not reflecting the United players. As I said within a lot of my responses to a lot of the comments, I think that the United players here in this tier are only buys in Game Week 3 onwards. So I was kind of glad that Mbumo didn't get an assist in Game Week 2, because I probably would have been wrong there. But yeah, I think now this is a great time to consider buying into United. You've got Burnley at home. This is a potential captaincy option that you're moving into. At the same time, I think that the minutes of Cunha and Mbumo have been super impressive at the start. So for me, I like Cunha more because I think he's more of a goal threat in open play, and Mbumo's going to get more set pieces, and that clearly has already provided some volume in terms of how United have actually created their chances so far. But as I said, I back the open play goals here in this case with Cunha. So a little bit of a difference in terms of, let's say, Kudush versus Johnson, but I think that's because Kudush is also very, very impactful in both ends of the pitch. Whereas Cunha, I think there's quite a big gap in terms of expected goals potentially versus Mbeumo, and that is significant. Otherwise, unfortunately, I've taken Saka out of the cheat sheet. I've also given Palmer a little bit of a preliminary drop. We still don't really have information on the time frame of the Palmer injury, but what I will say is just to reiterate what exactly Enzo had mentioned. He said there was a groin injury, that Palmer didn't felt something before the game versus, let's say, West Ham, but also prior to that, and also within the Crystal Palace game, had already been suffering with this sort of groin injury that is now being assessed. So to me, I think a lot of people are maybe underreacting to this. I think that could mean you're potentially losing Game Week 3, and then there's an international break, so that should allow him to come back in Game Week 4. So that's kind of how I feel about Palmer. But he gets a soft drop, and I can understand people making moves. This is an interesting week, right? I think if you're moving off of Palmer, Gakpo's interesting, just to secure potentially a long-term pick who's amazing, who, you know, will probably need Isak to not join to continue to be a great pick in terms of the overall sort of collection of minutes within that team. Cunha, I think, is a great transfer, especially if you need a captaincy for Game Week 3. Otherwise, a lot of picks have really been unexciting, right? So Wirtz, for example, falls into that camp. I haven't touched on Wirtz because I really think that Wirtz is still someone who could be quite exciting. He hasn't shown any of that so far, but these are tough games, and Game Week 3 is also going to be a tough game. So I'm going to assess Wirtz after Game Week 5, but I think right now he's safe to stay as a yellow tier pick. In the forward position, we haven't actually made too many changes. Osula gets to join this list because Gordon got himself a red card and a suspension for 3 games. That means that Osula should play, but obviously this is conditional on the Isak news as well. However, as a Game Week 3 punt, I think Osula is really, really, really good. But I'd probably still, you know, at this sort of price point, still consider Thiago. Full Krug with a half. I mean, Twitter did really drop on a gold piece here with calling Full Krug half Krug because of the halftime substitution, and you know that's going to lead you to drop in the cheat sheet, right? That's just what happens. Richarlison's has been added. I think amazing comments from Thomas Frank in terms of confirming that he's the number 1 right now, and it's his spot to lose. That there's obviously a lot of risk because I don't think you see as good of a almost number 2 within the league as Solanke. So that's just that situation. But Spurs have looked exceptional so far. So is Richarlison. So very exciting pick for all people. João Pedro gets a rise. I think, once again, it's West Ham piece is going to come back strong here as to, let's say, how monumental the haul is. But the reality is, if Palmer's out, João Pedro is just an amazing pick, right? You basically confirm more minutes in different sort of positions. You're confirming penalties in the end term as well. I just think it makes João Pedro that much more of a good pick. And yeah, he gets a rise very deservedly. Otherwise, we've also given Gyökeres a rise. The last cheat sheet was unfortunately recorded before the Havertz news came out, and the Havertz news, I think, is extremely significant in terms of how that impacts Gyökeres. And so, as you can see here, I've already given Gyökeres a massive rise from a differential tier to the green tier, but I think it's deserved. Even though Arsenal's fixtures are tough in the interim, I think Gyökeres is still better than, let's say, Watkins is if the fixtures were even, and the fixtures are not even, so that's why I still think they're both great green picks for now. If you miss the boat in terms of Watkins to Gyökeres like I did myself, I think that's fine, right? You just keep Watkins until Game Week 8. However, if you're, let's say, even wildcarding as of this week, I would actually consider just simply going for Gyökeres. I think he's that good. So have a thought about that. Otherwise, you know, there's a lot of strikers here who haven't done anything in terms of scoring goals, like Strand Larson, Evan Nilsson, Mateta, Watkins. I still think they're good picks, right? A lot of people can sit here and just say, I can't say that, but that's my take, and I'm going to hold on to that. Until they lose significant minutes, until they lose things like, for example, penalty share, etc., then we will respond. But I still think they're solid picks, and people just need to almost calm down a little bit because, unfortunately, this kind of thing can happen. Has it ever happened before in terms of so many sort of good picks, quote unquote, doing absolutely nothing? I don't think so. But I think I would just say remain calm and just realize that there's value to these picks. We're not going to have a season where all 3 or 4 of those players that I mentioned aren't going to do anything. So relax a bit. The next tier is going to be the defenders. I think there's really not too many changes to be made with the defenders. A lot of people have mentioned why there's so many green and yellow tier defenders. I just think that the DEFCON thing has just made so many defender picks viable. And unfortunately, that's going to be the state of the season, especially with, you know, DEFCON sort of overriding fixture difficulty as well. You're just going to see a lot of players stay in their positions, even though the fixture runs get worse and worse from an expected clean sheets point of view, because potentially they're still really, really good long-term holds, or they're just at an absurd price point. So Rodon has been added actually because he's a really good def corner for this Leeds team. I don't really have a lot of confidence in Sutherland, so they've been dropped off in the 4.0 position with Reynaldo. Konsa has been re-added, given that the suspension is now gone. Vandenberg has been added to the cheat sheet as well, because this is a player who's been racking up a lot of def cons for a Brentford defense that, as I said, I don't expect to be that bad as people expect, and he's at a good price point for that. At 5 million, I think we have a lot more confidence in Spurs now, early doors, especially with a really, really solid performance versus Man City. Not because they're the bogey team, but just I think generally speaking, Spurs have probably been quite impressive. So I've given Romero a rise, and this was playing a back four as well. Nico Williams and the Nottingham Forest piece, I think we're starting to see a lot more possession from this team. And that probably also means less opportunities for, I don't know, possession loss for the opponent team as well. So that kind of, unfortunately, has dropped a lot of the Nottingham Forest kind of players in terms of how I tier them, right? Nico Williams gets a drop. Later down the list, you also see Murillo getting a drop. Maybe I'm overreacting. They have really good games still, so I think they're easy holds, but this is something that I would like to mention in terms of a trend. Livramento and Byrne, I think, are good transfers now from Game Week 3 onwards. These are both players that I think should be nailed within this Newcastle team. Keep in mind that Shark could be on penalties, but I just don't really think that it's worth taking that risk just to get a penalty taker for a little bit more of an expensive price. So that's why I haven't really responded to that. Timber and Califorio I've added. I still think they're differentials because of the rotation aspect, and then also just simply, unfortunately, the lack of DEFCON value that playing reduced minutes will give you. I don't expect them to have as crazy good as performances as they had versus Leeds, but that's that. With Ait Nuri as well, the injury unfortunately is going to take him out of commission for a little bit here within the defender's cheat sheet. The last position we're going to look at is the movements in the goalkeepers. I think Kelleher definitely gets a rise. Brentford and Bournemouth, in my opinion, within this list of 4.5s are the teams that I probably respect the most in terms of defense. I have to say, as I said, I overrated Brighton a touch, so that's why I've already reacted to the Verbruggen piece. I probably also did the same in terms of sort of looking at the shot-stopping aspect of the Leeds and West Ham goalkeepers. I think they're still going to struggle as sides, and so that's why they get a drop in the cheat sheet. Potentially, I'm overcorrecting too much, but I think that with the start of the season, I just want to sort of be reactive as well, but not underreact as well, and that's sort of my assessment of things. With Vicario, I think the confidence in Spurs kind of carries through here with the goalkeepers, so that's going to be that, and that's going to be it for the cheat sheet this week. So thank you guys so much for watching. I'll see you guys soon. Take care and goodbye.